Well, good morning. Thank you very much for joining me on this video. I want to talk to you this morning about the liability of overconfidence. We've gone through 2 years of very, very hectic market, and now the market is shifting somewhat. Now, the pundits are discussing whether or not this is a speed bump or a new trend, but regardless, it's creating some dynamics in the marketplace because of a difference in the way buyers are approaching agreements of purchase and sale. During the time when we would, the norm, have a 244 in place and we'd get 10 or 15 competing offers, a buyer wanting to win wanted to make their offer as appealing as possible, so they would try and make it as clean as possible. And in reality, maybe they needed to have a conditional on sale of property, or maybe they needed a conditional on financing, or maybe they'd like to have had a condition on building inspection, but they elected to go without any of those conditions so that they could have the best offer in the pile in addition to price. And of course, as realtors, we would use the Form 127, which was condition and offer buyer acknowledgement, where we would go over with the buyer and have the buyer initial that I've elected to not put a sale of property clause, I've elected to not put a financing condition, I've elected to not put a building inspection condition, and they would sign off on that. And that was really to protect the realtor so that after the fact, if something came up and the buyer was in a jam, and they said, well, my realtor never told me, you'd say, oh yes, we discussed that. We went over the ramifications of not putting it in, and you elected to not put those conditions in. So we used the 127 to protect ourselves and to make sure that the buyer understood the exposure of going in without those conditions, but they would. And in the case of sale of property, I would like to think that the realtor was doing their homework with the buyer, and they would say, now what happens if your house doesn't sell? Oh, the market, everything is going to sell. Of course it's going to sell. Yeah, but what if it doesn't? Or what if it comes with $50,000 less than you're anticipating? Can you put the deal still together? Can you arrange bridge financing? And go over some of these eventualities with sale of property. But let's talk about the other two conditions: condition on financing and condition on building inspection. And so you go in without either one of them. Now the market's changed. What's happening? We got a phone call the other day. Salesperson had represented the buyer, put in an agreement of purchase and sale, and they did an appraisal, and the appraisal came in over $100,000 under the sale price. And of course, that, first of all, from a practical point of view, that causes some problems because now the buyer is going to get financing on a much lower price. They're going to either have to go in with a lot more down payment, or they're going to have to go in high ratio, or maybe they're going to have a problem altogether. That's the one practical part of it, but there's also a psychological part of it. You can guess exactly what happens. The buyer's going to say, well, wait a minute, I'm paying way too much money for this house. I want to renegotiate. And we got a call the other day where the agent was representing the seller, and the agent for the buyer called and said, my buyer would like to do a building inspection. And the agent has to decide whether or not, with conjunction with the seller, they're going to allow that to happen. Well, you know what's going to happen in that particular case. The building inspection is going to reveal some kind of deficiencies, and in the light of those deficiencies, the buyer is going to either want the seller to fix them, or the buyer is going to want a rebate in the price. So we've got some issues with a changing market. And first of all, let me say, let's look at the legal aspect. Legally, a deal is a deal. So if you've got a firm, unconditional deal, regardless of whether an appraisal comes in low or doesn't come in low, the buyer has agreed to buy the property under certain conditions, in other words, a closing date and so on, and at a certain price. He's bound by that. And we had it the other way around too. We had it where a long closing, the market's going up daily, and the seller says, well, wait a minute, my property's worth way more than back when we entered this agreement of purchase and sale. I want to renegotiate. Well, of course you can't. You can't legally. Agreement is an agreement. But then there's also the practical aspect of it. And the practical aspect of it gets into the issue of litigation and how long it will take and how much it will cost. So I think when these situations crop up, and the situation is the seller is faced with a buyer who wants to renegotiate, The seller's got to take a look at the agreement of purchase and sale, take a look at how large the deposit is, take a look at how long the closing is, take a look at the current market and say, if I put it back on the market, what is the potential of me getting that price again and how long is it going to take to sell? It may be, let's say the situation where it appraised $100,000 under sale price. It may be the buyer could say, well, I want a $20,000 abatement in the price or I'm not going to close. And the seller may say, you know, I don't want to give away 20, but if I put it back on the market, I'm going to probably get 80,000 less. And for me to go to court and tie it up and not be able to sell the property and not be able to get on with my life, the practical thing may be to absorb the 20,000 loss and renegotiate. I'm not saying they should, I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm saying you as a realtor are going to be in those trenches sitting down with your seller, if you're representing the seller, or the buyer, negotiating with them and facing these issues because you got some very practical issues. Now, the other question is, you're representing the seller and the buyer wants to know an appraisal after the fact. They didn't put it in the agreement of purchase and sale. They have no legal right to an appraisal, but from a practical point of view, they may not be able to go ahead with financing without an appraisal. You may have to say, all right, we'll let you have an appraisal, with the understanding that regardless of what the appraisal comes in, you're going ahead with the purchase. So, but as far as the building inspection is concerned, I would advise you just simply say no. Now, you may want to say, I need to talk to my seller and tell the seller to talk to the lawyer, and if the lawyer's halfway on the ball, he'll say, don't allow a building inspection, and then you can blame the lawyer. You can say, well, we're not trying to be obstacles, but we're told don't go ahead with it. But I wouldn't do it. I can't think of any reason why a buyer needs a building inspection before closing. As I said, it's going to open a can of worms of some deficiency and wanting a rebate or wanting the seller to do some repairs. And the buyer may say, well, I just want to know the scope of work. Well, they can wait till closing and get the scope of work. So I wouldn't want to move forward with that. But some of these issues, and there's no absolute black and white answer, I realize. I'm kind of giving you a nebulous answer, but I want to give you a heads up because you're going to be facing some of these things in a shifting and changing market. And to be forewarned is to be forearmed. You just want to be prepared. I want to thank you very much for joining me in this video. I look forward to talking to you again next week.